you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you.
Okay, great. Let me just get my timer up. I'll take a POI around 5 minutes. Okay, starting in three, two, one, go. I'm going to start with three things. First, I'm going to explain what the problems are currently facing research and why there's a huge bottleneck within research that's preventing a large amount of development. Secondly, I'm going to explain why having this centralized national agency is important and explain how our model actually solves all of these issues. And thirdly, I'm going to explain, independent of this problem in research, why generally having this national organization reduces costs and improves things like economies of scale, etc. So why is the big problem in research? I think what's happening is that within science, there's a huge amount of development. You have things like AI and all of these like space technology, all these technologies that grow extremely quickly, oftentimes within the span of a couple of years. Oftentimes, it's really difficult to keep up with that. What that means is that there's a huge amount of disjointedness in the distribution of current equipment versus where that equipment actually needs to be in the first place. And why is this the case? I think one of the biggest reasons is that the way that things work under status quo is that usually high equipment is owned by certain departments within universities or under certain professors or like small group of professors who run that research, who got funding from the lab and have like bought that equipment, maintained that equipment, and use that equipment for their research. The problem is with the pace at which scientific technology moves and the difficulty of which it is to predict what scientific innovations are going to be good and what scientific innovations are going to be bad. A lot of the research that these professors do are outdated or not as relevant to society as they were potentially 2 or 3 decades ago. So the sort of foundational research and specialism that many of these professors built their careers on and use that technology for are no longer things that are currently relevant or currently things that we need to advance scientific progress in the first place. I think it's for several reasons, right? Like, firstly, as a professor, oftentimes you spend decades building up research in a certain field, which means you're much less likely to be able to adapt to something else, either because you don't have that skill set. So, for example, you're a scientist doing something in like computer science or like for example, operating systems, but now AI and machine learning is hot. It's really difficult for you to switch field. But secondly, you don't want to switch field. All your citations and all your papers are based on this. This is how you built your name. This is what's on your Wikipedia page. This is in your autobiography. Oftentimes, there's a huge amount of cognitive dissonance to be able to accept that suddenly your research is no longer relevant. Suddenly, your research is not something that has a center stage. It's really difficult to accept that. What this means is that you're just less likely to use that equipment that you own, whether in your faculty or whether you as a professor or group of professors, you're less likely to use that equipment for those modern things. You're much more likely to use that to continue the research that is otherwise would be outdated because you got that funding initially, you got that funding for that equipment 2, 3 decades ago, and now it's not something that relevant, but you want to be relevant, so you continue using that equipment. But secondly, you often refuse to allow new ideas and refuse to allow new experiments to use that equipment. That is, that you don't take on PhD students to allow you to use that equipment. You don't take that might contradict your results or that might push the research in a different direction. You don't want to be outcompeted by them. You oftentimes have a very strong idea of what that equipment should be used for and what research should be done using that equipment. You don't necessarily see the merits in allowing, for example, a PhD student or an external researcher to use that equipment for something else. But secondly, there's a huge amount of asymmetry that occurs at the university level. That is because oftentimes universities oftentimes help fund these equipment, and universities oftentimes want that equipment used for their own research by their own scientists. This is because they want to elevate their own standing within academia. They want to show themselves as the place where students should apply to, where people need to come to them. And so oftentimes having equipment and using that equipment for themselves is something that they oftentimes invest in so that they can elevate their position within society. What this means basically is that oftentimes universities don't want to share and don't want to share this equipment with other researchers that are external to them because they oftentimes want to keep those results themselves. They want to have their name on that paper. They want to have that prestige associated with it. So they are less likely to allow that in the first place. What this means is that a lot of talented people and young academics tend to be restricted in the sort of access and sort of research that they're able to do because they don't have access to the equipment that they need, but they're not given permission to do so, or they're just located in the wrong place. Before I continue, I'll take a clarification.
If 10 different universities apply at the same time for access to an equipment, what's your model for prioritizing them?
Oh, so what's the metric for prioritization? Okay, yeah, exactly. I'm going to get into that. So this is why centralized national agencies are going to make good decisions are actually good. I think several things. Firstly, I think, and we have to say this, that we're going to have a panel of experts to decide this. This panel of experts is going to represent a more diverse academic view. So they're more likely to be academically neutral because there are more of them to make this decision. But secondly, they have a much lower vested interest in how the equipment is used because this is not their own equipment. They don't own it. It's not part of their lab. It is something that they are deciding on behalf of the government. For these reasons, I think it means that we're just going to get a much more neutral opinion that is given on what research is good and what needs to, and a more broader opinion because we have many different academics contributing to that decision rather than a small faculty or sect within the university. Secondly, I think that what nationalization does, it allows the societal implications to be considered. That is, the wider social value of research can also be considered. We can have people like policymakers also be sitting in that board meeting and saying, this is what we need to develop, this is what we need from like industry experts, this is what we need to invest in and make better. I think what this means is that we can have that social element that you just don't get when a professor is deciding what research gets done. I think what this means is that also we're going to be willing to develop things like a logistic network and collaborate with people like Amazon, etc., in order to like distribute that equipment and move it around. And it's generally going to be funded by things like tax. On private sector investment, the way that we're going to model this is that the private sector is able to give money to the government to buy equipment to then allocate to research that the private sector is supporting. Alternatively, we're happy for private sector to not fund as much equipment and fund things like postdoc positions and training of personnel and like funding softer bits of the research rather than just equipment. I think that the private sector has huge incentives to continue funding and investing in research. I don't think this changes on either side of the house. What this means is that I think that governments are likely to continue and care a lot about this funding. I think it's politically something that looks really great. I think it's something that a politician can stand by like a large particle collider and say, we've invested this as a government. I don't think it's something that governments cut, and there's a huge amount of national interest because research often coincides very strongly with things like, for example, healthcare and things like military, which are very strongly on the public agenda. What happens as a result of this model is that we get research that is delivered much more optimally, regardless of things like historical legacy or like professors' biases. We get research delivered to things that are societally needed, which means that we just get the economy and research reorientated towards things that need funding now to fund the technology of the future much faster. This means things like investment into AI or synthetic biology that we need right now rather than things on outdated technologies and outdated research that otherwise would be funded. What this also means, and regardless of these impacts, is that we just have more money for universities because the government is footing the bill for this equipment. We have much more money for universities to actually fund things like scholarships and personnel. Point at which oftentimes it's not equipment that's limiting these research when we've solved this issue, but things like personnel funding. For all these reasons, extremely proud to propose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call leader of opposition. Woo.
Am I visible and audible for everybody?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so if that's so, I will be starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Firstly, a clarification. Notice this is not only a debate about universities, also a debate about companies. For example, startups doing AI. They have to defend the burden of taking away Google supercomputers and they're taking their AI division. This is also a debate about, for example, international organizations such as like CERN, and I will expand on that later. Let's start from rebuttal to the relevance. A few points on that. You literally do most research on the most relevant subjects. This is true because you get the most funding from companies, from institutions, from the government. Countries want to compete in order to have like their high technologies. Companies are interested and people are interested. Secondly, who will do that research if not the academia? They are literally the best suited. They are experts. They have studied those things for many years. Even companies will turn often to academia. The companies will do it themselves and see like companies. Like if you have startups focusing on biotech, and if it's like so prevalent and so such a hot topic, then you'll have massive investments, a lot of research into that. That is why, for example, we have AI companies for doing incredible research outside of universities. This still exists on our side of the house. And quickly rebuttal to cooperation, a few points of that. By their own metric, cooperation probably help those universities because you can get like the best minds from all over the world. You can get the best experts, and often you need to do that because of how specialized like the projects are. CERN has people working from like many countries, so by their own metric, the research will be more effective. Thus, the university will get more credit. Thus, the university will like be more regarded. Secondly, notice that universities are not just profit driven. Universities are literally there to promote knowledge. This is their goal. This is what the board of trustees at most universities promote. This is what like the students want, and like how people in academia actually operate, which we believe that is why they'll keep on cooperating. And C, notice how universities are entangled in like academia generally in a big international network. You have multi-governmental, for example, deals that promote cooperation. Universities sign deals with other universities. You have projects such as CERN, especially like the most high-tech fields or like the most expensive research facilities that need funding from all over the world, where scientists from all over the world, like in reality check are cooperating right now. CERN is a European project, like physicists from all over Europe and the world, like this simply doesn't like exist on their side of the house. Okay, on our side of the house, two constructive cases. Why you have less research, and then why the research is less effective. Notice that, as I have told you, we have many different research institutions. We have companies that, for example, do research into pharma or AI or like nuclear energy. We have private universities. Yale, for example, built a literal nuclear power plant to teach their students on particle physics and to do research that they would confiscate from Yale. I don't know how it would look like, but okay. And see, we have like international institutions, and on their side of the house, presumably CERN would be confiscated by Switzerland or something. Okay, so why we believe that this would like lead to less research? Nobody would invest in this cutting-edge research. You need this type of equipment, especially in STEM, where you need to measure things, you need to count things that can be done otherwise. People will not invest in that because they literally spend billions and it's taken away from them. They have to start all over. They're mad and angry, and probably they fear that the government will take it away from them again or will do something bad to them. Secondly, they won't probably want to collaborate with states because the states just probably taken away like billions of their money. They're probably angry. They have strong emotion against state. B, they are fearful that the state will just take away the profits of their research, like the things that they research, because they have seen that the state is a very aggressive communist actor, basically. And C, they probably despise the state. They do not want to cooperate with that. And C, notice that cooperation with states is extremely difficult, especially like for private companies, because they need to like fulfill many more regulations. They have many more limitations. They have like political guidelines imposed by the states, which makes it much more costly, much less profitable, and basically higher for these companies and less efficient. Two impacts from this. Either less research. This means, for example, less life drugs, less new therapies, like less new discoveries. Like we wouldn't probably have the boson Higgs discovery on their side of the house, but even if we attain from these types of research, because like nobody wants to say that they are doing something that may cost them basically billions of dollars. Okay, let's talk now why. Hey guys, I'm so sorry. Was I kicked off from Zoom?
I think you cut out for about, I don't know, 20 seconds. So let's,
Excuse me.
can you hear me?
Wait, maybe I'll turn off my camera just.
Sure. So
Okay. At what time did I finish? Like, what is the last thing you have noted?
I think you can restart from the 4th minute. This is where you were going for the implications of less discoveries and stuff like that.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I can't hear. Can I get a minute? I will just maybe basically do a different Zoom.
Yeah.
Sorry,
okay.
like give me a minute. I'm so sorry about that.
It's okay.
Can you hear me right now? Because I can see you much better. I'm so sorry about all of the technical things. That wasn't planned.
It's okay. I can hear you. It's still not not the best, but I guess let's just keep your camera off and see if it works.
Ah. Hey, can you hear me right now?
Yes,
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
it's okay.
Maybe can we stop recording? Because I think it's also taking a toll on Zoom. I'm so sorry about that, but I just want to finish my speech basically.
It's okay. Volunteer, Ersin, can we stop recording? Then,
Okay. Is it good now?
yeah.
Okay. Two comments from opening government at the top of this speech. The first is to point out that opening opposition presents an extreme characterization. We are not confiscating Yale's nuclear reactors, nor are we removing Google's supercomputers and never giving them back. In fact, those companies and institutions which will continue to be allocated such technologies because of the very model that we have created. All we do is create an extra step, an extra stage, which ensures that research equipment is always being used for the most efficient purposes, not just getting dusty in labs, and ensuring that companies that are accessing such equipment, like Google and Yale, actually have strong, promising ideas. So those projects are untouched by this motion. Secondly, opening opposition asserts, but does not take down, the reasons why research is profoundly inefficient in the status quo due to the bottleneck of technology. First of all, between places, certain research institutions geographically do not have access to critical research equipment due to capital shortages. This is the vast majority of research ideas, by the way, that get killed at the inception stage, precisely because businesses, companies, institutions do not have the equipment necessary to test their ideas. And this is important because on scope, this is the largest amount of research which does not exist on their side and they do not give any solution for. Secondly, we explained that the very nature of universities internally, even well-resourced ones, often lead to monopolistic structures of equipment where professors have control over how lab equipment is used. With that being said, I'm going to chat about two things in the speech that prove why opening government win. First, why the government will nationalize research equipment well, and then why this means we get better and more research directly flipping the contributions we hear from opening opposition. The first thing I'm going to explain is why the highest impact researchers will continue to be able to access equipment when they need it, and why the government will do this well. And I'm going to divide this into two parts. First, I'm going to talk about incentive, and secondly, I'm going to talk about capacity. Firstly, on incentive, the government has 5 reasons why they will do this well. First of all, because governments can be fucked over by failing to invest or provide the equipment necessary for a potentially high impact piece of research. They can reap the rewards on the counterfactual of pushing through an investment for a very impactful piece of research, like a space technology or a medical intervention like a COVID vaccine. Secondly, because academics are very influential in government. They have a huge amount of lobbying power, creating epidemiological investments, having think tanks, etc., which influence policy. So there's constant pressure on the government from a very socially influential group who has access to lots of people to keep research equipment being funded consistently. Thirdly, countries nationally have a competitive incentive to stay ahead of research because countries are competing against one another to create developments in a variety of fields. So things like space, things like medicine, things like green technology, that countries are in battles against one another, like Russia and China and America, for instance, to ensure that they have the most cutting edge technology and can succeed. But fourthly, because countries want to retain their industrial advantages, which means that they oftentimes want to allocate research to where it is most efficient so that they can develop products that employ lots of people. That's a political advantage for people in power. But fifthly, the government is less obsessed with profit motives than the private sector is, meaning that they are uniquely able to give technologies to experimental groups which would otherwise receive very little investment. Crucially, even if this is not the majority of their investment, it will still go to the most high impact and predictable ones. It is a significant change from the status quo because currently those investments which are so risky never get investment. And this means that blue skies research gets far more funding on our side of the house. Even if very few of these succeed, I want to weigh the impact. It means that there are huge potential technologies which are able to come into existence and save hundreds of lives that would not get any development on their side of the house. The second thing I'll talk about is why the national body will have the capacity to do this well. I also have 5 reasons for this. First of all, when the government has all of the technology, it is easier to give the scientists the combinations of technologies that they need on the ground. For instance, maybe a scientist needs a large radio processing machine in addition to extensive microscope technologies to do their work. Because all of this is coagulated, governments can now better deliver the bundles of technology that these scientists need. Secondly, the body is likely to be well-financed and can expand. They're able to charge lower costs per access and over time increase the pool of research equipment available. This also does not require a huge amount of steady capital to keep running, because uniquely, this is just a pool of technology that can more easily be shared around the country. Thirdly, we fiated in that there will be the best experts and specialized bodies who allocate the research equipment who can be replaced for failing to do a good job. Therefore, there's an internal incentive for those in the company or the nationalized body to do this well. Fourthly, we fiated in funding mechanisms from private sources to ensure the costs recovered to take care of this investment will be met. And fifthly, we said that the government is capable of attracting investments because it will be seen as a very prestigious job, essentially planning a huge amount of national research and the National Research Directive. Why is this all important? Because it explains why the system will run super efficiently and not cause the insane backlogs that opening opposition might discuss in the debate. The application process will run smoothly and technology. So Google will still get their technology because they're high impact. Yale will still get their technology because they're able to show that they're doing promising things with the research. What then is the comparative in this debate? We stop the monopolization of a few people holding a huge amount of technology, but not being able to use it in the most efficient ways. So we spread technology across large groups of people, whereas before it was being hoarded in concentrations of research that are highly inefficient. We ensure that tons of people who otherwise would not have the upfront capital to develop innovations now have the capacity to do so. It also means way more businesses, particularly at the starting stages, are able to access the equipment to test products and scale up, whereas way more would fail in the initial stages on their side. So venture capital funds who want to break into a biomedical intervention that could save hundreds of lives, for example, or a company interested in aeronautical engineering that could employ tons of people now get the equipment that they need. This explains why the project is done well, and if closing government wants to run stuff, they're also dependent on this. Before I continue to why this flips their case on more and better research, I'll take a POI, please.
How many instances do you think that researchers from very small universities who don't have these equipments would have the idea of this groundbreaking research at the very first place?
Well, many do, right? Like, just because you don't come from a good institution doesn't mean that you can't have good ideas. And also there's scale to this, right? It's not just poor institutions, rich institutions. The majority of institutions are mid-tier that cannot afford the most cutting edge equipment. We ensure that they get it. So secondly, flipping this stuff about more and better research. The first thing I want to add here is a positive contribution. This inspires investment into private research and new research firms for three reasons. First, because companies and investors feel a greater degree of confidence and stability that firms will be able to attract and be able to gain the technology they physically need for them to scale up. Secondly, there is greater planning and efficiency in the system overall, and so research as a profitable field becomes more attractive. This is because technology is more flexibly allocated. Right now, a huge amount of research equipment just sits in labs where they are not being used in the most effective ways. Thirdly, it allows the government to coordinate and filter out research which is duplicative and ensure only the most efficient research which gets the best track records focused on particular research niches are able to be developed. This creates clarity in the market, which spurs a ton of research. This flips opposition's points about losing investment into research. I've now explained why there's far more research interest. Secondly, it allows research equipment to more effectively be accessed cheaply, as Ahmed explains, because there's a huge barrier to entry that now completely gets killed by the fact that we've nationalized this policy. But thirdly, we ensure that capital goes to the most high impact companies rather than the least effective ones by filtering through a bunch of research and allocating technology on that basis. In addition to this, we create a huge number of benefits. We free up capital for universities to give more money to scholarships because millions of dollars that are otherwise used on research equipment are now being able to be spent on people. What this means in the long term is that there's more interest in research, more financing for research, more money in research, and better research overall, which saves hundreds of lives. I'm proud to propose.
Hey, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Deputy Leader of Opposition. Woo.
All right, can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Awesome. In that case, starting now. Panel, read the motion again and don't let them get away with half of the burden. If the CA team would like to have the debate about the universities exclusively, presumably assuming feasibility would not be in this motion and the word university would be. Therefore, Gov need to handle with the whole burden, complaints to CA team, not to us. Second of all, couple of things. A, I never heard why it's not legitimate to have the right to the private property as the private university or the company. On their side of the house, you literally taking away currently existing research development and the equipment, but also you preventing in the future, right? Because currently you can tell to the investors, I am stable. If I will build here the particular facility, I will have X amount of great students. I will have X amount of researchers working on that for 5 or 10 years. I have a place to make the tests. Comparative is I need to apply for the grant. Maybe I will get access. Unclear for how long I will get access. And still, if I am low university, which is not having Yale or Oxford fame, I still, based on OG, this universities will still have priority to get this, right? Listen for them. I literally need to give away my equipment to then get it from the state for less amount of time, less efficiency. And it's not explained to me, specifically if they're telling to me that these researchers already get some level of funding in order to build this equipment. So they obtain this in the legitimate matters. They already have a good track record in a lot of cases and proving efficacy. On their side of the house, it's all uncertain. But let me dive more to rebutting what opening government brought to this debate. Firstly, about not sitting dusty in labs. Maybe in the short term, you are capable to distribute currently existing things, but you will be less likely to creating more in the future, or you will be more likely to hide this, as Jan told you. If I know that if I create a special equipment and I will start brag about this, the state will come to me and be like, okay, I have a great board of experts. I will take your things. Maybe I will pay you a little bit of more money. And then the state will take all of the benefits. As the private university, I don't have much incentive to collaborate, but I'm more likely hide the new discoveries until I will get enough like profit, and then I'm giving it away to the state, which means that on the utility metric, all of the great stuff which can come from this research is not achieved, but in the long term, it's also shifting to the different field because it didn't seem like a stable venture capital investment. Second of all, I'm not sure why, because I have great idea, I shouldn't sell it. If you are a researcher who don't have an equipment, but you think that it's a great for the humanity, there are so many ways that you can pitch your project, right? You can pitch this and collaborate between universities. You can pitch this to the venture capital. You can pitch this for the state grant. You can pitch this for the science grant. This is literally possible on our side of the house. The comparative on your side of the house, it's for the best people who have the best capacity. You're making their process slower, more bureaucracy, more uncertain, and also more risky in the transport, because panel note, this is not a Sci-Hub. This is not files which you are transferring via email. These are literally massive things, right? Which means that there is likely to be damage during the transportation. It's likely to take a lot of time. It's also extremely difficult on the practical level. So I'm not sure how Gov can win the practical claims on this side of the house. So even taking them at their best, if there are small universities who don't have capacity to use this research tool, sell it, advertise this, find a way to win the grant on the competitive market, which we acknowledge, which is legitimate way to earn with the property. Then they're talking about the combination between, like, you know, the state can give you different type of research, but that also gave you immense pool to pick up. If you are if you are one of the institutes, right? You're still competing against the other institute from your university and trying to convince your university that they should buy you this particular access because it still will be costly. I'm unclear why the results of this competition will be the best one, right? Even if you will have the most efficient board and the best one, they will still try to look for the best potential profit maximization. So all of these low cost people will not have the access, but also it's unclear if the students, if the institutions will make the correct choice, what they should prioritize, because sometimes you have a lot of competing researchers from the institutes. On our side of the house, you have specialized institutes who are taking the investment, venturing, and for example, you have best division in AI in one department, you have best division on physics or biology or chemistry somewhere else, and they have enough pool of space, enough pool of investment in order to make the testing, in order to make the accelerator, I don't know, trial run, etc., right? Therefore, we think you are less likely to collaborate because as a company or private university, you don't see the potential profit coming in. But also they're telling you that it will be, that it will be efficient on their side of the house. It sounds like 20 steps are required for you to be efficient in your bureaucracy and making the choices, which means that if in one step, for example, you will be giving to the richer universities, you're already not having your trickle-down effect, but you have all of the negative harms on our side of the house, and you can't have it all on yours. Therefore, panel, I want to also pose like a principle push on the government. I think it's legitimate to own your private property and compete with the other universities by trying to attract the best researchers and in order to gain the biggest amount of profit. Why this is the case? A, the research is already not for everyone equally in the first place, right? You already need to have a certain field, you need to have certain dedication, you need to sacrifice a lot of things, you need to put a lot of work. Second of all, you're already investing money in this place, you have important purpose, you want to serve for the community, so you also will be giving back on the utilitarian metric. But before I move on, I want to engage with CG.
Yeah, so I'm sure medical researchers in the 40s had right to their private property, but it serves a public good and is therefore justified to nationalize, no?
I mean, yes, but that will be public good after you will finalize your research. You are stopping this public good from being even accessed or slowing this down, right? Because you can't guarantee on your side of the house that by micromanaging and by distributing this research to 20 different places, you will be capable to get the same results, specifically when you also emphasizing the importance of collaboration. And also when Yannick gave you 5 reasons, what makes the research being effective, which is not being engaged, why you need people in the same place, why you need to have some level of stability, why you need to have some level of vision in order to achieve this, why you need to have test and trial run. On your side of the house, if I'm failed with my experiment on the research after I borrowed your equipment or got access, I need to wait another month to get the approval. My investors are being like, why taking so long? I want to get my profit already. And they're like, no, sorry. Now they gave access to this Wisconsin university because this had this bright idea and expert decided to equalize the chances. Therefore, the public goods, it's not being accessed. We think it's A, illegitimate to take out the private property from the universities and other actors. And second of all, it damages the efficacy, therefore opening up.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech. And to continue and open the second half, very proud to call government member. Ooh.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Beginning in 3, 2, 1. 2 extensions from closing government. First, on why you get more efficient research with a focus on actual equipment as opposed to opening government stuff on like generic research. Second, on how this changes university behavior, and folded into that a principal justification on why private property is probably bad and why the state doing this is better. First, on more efficient research, the opening government claim here is that universities compete with each other to not let external researchers access equipment and to improve academic standing. I want to extend this competition. The first way I'm going to extend this competition is to prove that universities do incredibly similar kinds of research when it comes to these fields. The first reason for this is that they want to outcompete in terms of making academic breakthroughs. This is different from opening government, who says that they want to improve academic standing. And the key difference here when it comes to high-cost research equipment is that these are incredibly specialized fields. One, things like medicine, where the amount of space that you have is incredibly limited in the first place. Second, when it comes to places like microbiology and many STEM subjects, where the amount of research that you can do in terms of the space that you have is incredibly limited. Therefore, if they want to outcompete when it comes to making academic breakthroughs, the space that you have is incredibly limited, and therefore many universities often do similar kinds of research. The second thing is that often professors have similar areas of expertise. And the reason for this is that your education in a field for a large part of your academic career is similar. That is, that you do an undergraduate degree and you do a master's degree in a specific subject, but also there's a shit ton of research that has happened throughout history. So what that then means, furthermore, is that the space for specialization when it comes to these fields is incredibly limited. But the second thing here is that they build similar types of equipment. And the reason for this is to do the research that we're talking about. That is, that equipment is the prerequisite for research. The scale of this is massive because equipment is incredibly hard to build and takes an incredibly long amount of time. The thing then that opening government misses here is that this equipment just doesn't fly into these university laboratories. That is, that it has to be built. So if you buy that they do similar kinds of research within super specialized fields, they also spend a lot of time building similar kinds of equipment. This also beats Claudia's responses on private property because the future creation is something that doesn't happen if you do buy that they build similar types of equipment. The impacts of this are 2 things. First, this is the comparative reason when it comes to the motion for redundant research, because this debate is about equipment. We explain specifically why the competition leads to incredibly similar types of equipment and incredibly similar types of research. It's unclear why opening government, one, why this equipment is used in the first place in the way to do this research, but two, how this equipment is created in the first place. The secondary impact, which is the big thing in this debate, is first is the huge waste of money, because similar universities are devoting similar amounts of money to incredibly expensive research. Second, this is an incredible waste of time because equipment takes a long time to build, and this research then takes a long time to create in the first place. But thirdly, this is extremely redundant in the first place. This just initially responds to opening opposition on time delay. But the second more extraneous response is that there are approval processes when it comes to universities too. So if you buy my analysis on why it's incredibly specialized, you then have to wait a long period of time. You have to create a proposal that fits within this limited space and then send it to your university. That also takes a amount of time. So the opening opposition push on time delay is incredibly mitigated in this debate. What changes then? I think firstly, when all of the research equipment is centralized, there's knowledge of what research equipment exists and where it necessarily exists. Where it is within society. So what this then does, and opening up government does say this, but specifically when it comes to research, one, universities have knowledge of where this equipment is and are therefore less likely to build a similar thing if something already does exist. But two, then they're less likely to do similar kinds of research to that equipment, because this equipment, when there's knowledge that this equipment exists in a specific place, you then have no incentive to build it. But thirdly, competition does not exist in terms of building the actual technology. So if opening opposition's best case is true and the incentive to not build this equipment exists, then we're able to capitalize best on this research existing in the status quo and then allocate it like in an efficient way. The broad impact of this is just efficient allocation of research. I think this is the comparative prerequisite for anything from opening government to function, because universities still, as they point out, do this research. The claim here from closing government is that this equipment in and of itself is like there's knowledge of that, and then you doing similar kinds of research and building similar kinds of equipment just doesn't exist. So the impact then is just efficient allocation of research. This is the prerequisite for opening government stuff, because they never deal with the actual building of this equipment in the first place. Before I move on to how this changes university behavior, I'll take Claudia.
All right, worst case, they are building similar equipment, but they have different inputs, they have different people working on this, and they are competing to be the fastest to publish, the fastest to patent, and therefore you are having an open competition and not waiting when your turn will come to take the equipment. So it came more on our side.
So I get that, right? So if there's a if they're building similar kinds of things and there's a competition, if Oxford builds it in 1,000 hours and Cambridge builds it in 900 hours, Cambridge's 900 hours just go to waste. They waste a shit ton of money because that never happens. When the government has it, Cambridge knows that the government has that equipment and therefore is able to refocus on doing other things. So one, if universities are the actors that do this research, they're better able to efficiently allocate because they see that this necessarily exists. But two, this doesn't respond to our push on why similar equipment is bad. Please listen to the impacting. How does this change university behaviors? I think the first problem that exists is that universities are able to get away with this quality of research. So even if they do redundant forms of redundant forms of building equipment and similar kinds of research, they're able to still get that published. But the issue here is that they gain reputation from that, and lots of like university ranking systems judge them on the quality of research. But according to opening opposition, if research does get harder, firstly, the incentive to pump out similar kinds of research just goes down. But secondly, if the incentive to put out research still exists, Claudia analyzes why that necessarily exists. You then the ability for universities to be judged on research just goes down. So the way this changes then is firstly, they have to move away from this research, because now they can't do similar kinds of research and then be judged on this similar kind of research. So I think they need to find their own comparative advantage when it comes to other universities. This looks like one, better professors and like the quality of teaching that exists. So for example, I used to go to Edinburgh Uni, the quality of research was amazing, but the teachers were actually shit. If you're now unable to be judged on the research equipment that you build, even if it is redundant, you now have to be judged on other things like the quality of teaching, the environment that you exist. So the actual calculus when it comes to judging universities just shifts towards something that is better. I think first, this just fosters a better learning environment for students. And I think we should weigh these students highly in the debate because they're the majority of students, because most students don't do research. But secondly, this is just principally justified because the purpose of education is not necessarily research. And if research is so unequal, then you ought to not prioritize research and other things like the quality of professors and education. We've won on efficiency, we've won behavior of universities. For all of the reasons, please propose.
we thank the speaker for that speech and very proud to call member of opposition. Woo.
Hello, I'll just be taking a couple of seconds. Hello, am I visible as well as audible? Perfect. Vansh, going member 4. I'll try to take OG, not CG, and you don't have to unmute, you can just type POI in the chat. Perfect. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The extension and closing opposition is simple. I'll first characterize the way in which states actually determine the relevance of research to fund, which OG wants to posit. I'll then explain that why a lot of universities like liberal art and psychology university, etc., just asymmetrically get fucked over, and then I'll impact that better than an opening. Firstly, how does state actually determine relevance of what to fund? OG says it's probably things like AI and extremely relevant technology. Exactly. I'm going to explain how this happens. First, the panel that OG wants to actually have these deliberations are actually motivated by current trends and things that are currently relative, because that's the thing that they're more proximate to, and that's the thing that hits them the most. So that's the thing that they're likely to vote on to actually fund. Second is on OG's analysis of how people actually don't want to move away from the research that they're doing because they're attached to it. So this panel is also probably attached to the AI research that they're doing. So they probably only want to fund AI startups and colleges that are working on AI research. Third, and this gets more nuanced here. In a lot of instances, a lot of countries often don't receive new ideas or don't welcome new ideas in good ways. For example, in a lot of developing countries and underdeveloped countries like India, psychology and therapy is still seen as something that is a Western liberal propaganda, is not something that people should actually spend their time on. And there's two reasons for this. First is that often these countries have immense amount of otherization towards other Western countries. Therefore, they see these things like psychology as propaganda. Secondly, is also narratives like nationalism, like you should always promote your tradition and always stick to your own culture because that forms your identity. So people are often unwilling to perceive ideas from different countries, especially the West, in that good ways. Fourth and last is that often many universities are not politically aligned to the ideology of the state. For example, a lot of liberal art universities that conduct archaeological research, etc., are not politically aligned with the state. The state might be center right, they might be center left. Insofar as that is true, state has incentives to always skew the funding towards universities that align with their agenda, because now state at government has all the power in the world to choose the funding that they want to, choose the projects that they want to fund. Now, on the comparative, how do these universities like liberal art universities and psychology and therapy research universities at opposition raise money? There are a lot of resources. For example, Western actors who really care about this and billionaires who want to fund research because they're too old and they want to spend their money on science because they always had the dream of being a scientist, but they couldn't. Also, they sometimes have to they sometimes want to raise goodwill within their own circle by funding research, and often they have incentives to whitewash their image. At government, all the external funding that these universities were able to raise on our side for the research equipment is stolen away by the state, and they can't do it independently because state keeps stealing all the equipments that they raise their funds for. Which is why on their side, these universities don't get money as compared to on our side, where they do have some money. Now, government probably try to respond and say that, hey, if state doesn't agree with their ideology, they're going to crack down anyways. That might be true, but note, it happens more at government's comparative. Why? Because at government, states don't have to explicitly crack down and take the research away. At government, insofar as this policy is passed, state gets passive justification to justify never giving research money to these things, because they can say that, hey, this is the thing that's more relevant, so we're going to fund AI and never going to fund psychology research because it's not as relevant as Western propaganda, etc. At op, in order for states to do this crackdown, they have to be much more explicit and explain why these things are bad. So at gov, they can do it passively, therefore it happens more. What's the impact of this? First, a lot of long-term research projects, for example, long-term diseases offer more research on mental illnesses, and for example, research on depression, anxiety, etc., gets fucked over in these underdeveloping and underdeveloped countries. The reason why this is true because of literally OG's entire government analysis of you never fund things which are like more long term because you want to always fund the things which are more short term and more relevant. So this derives future people off of utility who could have benefited off of this research when it actually manifested into some good results. Second, I'm going to take our worst case and say that, hey, even if archaeological research or psychology research doesn't actually do any good for the world objectively, it is still important. Why is this true? Because note at government, the research and scientists who do this sort of research just go out of a job because they never get the equipment to do their research. So they're never able to roll out research papers. And the worth of a scientist or a researcher or university is often determined by the amount of research papers that they publish, because that's what determines that how good they are for the world, which is literally what government wants. And insofar as they never get equipment, they're never able to roll out research papers. So they eventually just stop getting like recognition, and they eventually have to switch to a different field. Why is this incredibly bad? First, these scientists often love their fields a lot. That is, a person who has been working in psychology for the last 30 years find psychology as the means in which they actualize themselves in this world, because they spend their childhood years and their teenage years and their entire adult life researching into this. It becomes a part of their identity. Second, it gives them intellectual satisfaction when they go to research and like go to the lab today, and they, by the end of the day actually find some incremental benefit or some incremental finding in the research. It gives them intellectual satisfaction. Third, it helps them deal with the daily monotonies of life. The reason why we all debate, even though many of us have jobs, etc., and internships, etc., is literally why debating helps us deal with the monotony of their life. Similarly, for these people, their research and their own field is the way in which they deal with this. And fourthly and lastly, it gives them a community of like-minded people whom they do this research with. So they actually get a community of people that they can talk about their work to, which is incredibly beneficial for them. Before I move on to further impacting, I'll take OG.
Most world-changing discoveries never get developed because institutions and businesses never get the equipment to make them. The market inefficiently allocates research technology, as we proved, worsening duplicates, reducing research investment.
Got 15 seconds. 15 seconds. All right. Coming on to actually engaging with OG, and my impact will directly deal with OG. Firstly, OG benefits, I would posit, accrue on either automatically without the existence of this policy. Why? Because if AI and machine learning are actually in the trend, they would get funded regardless, because a lot of funding gets directed to it either ways. The delta is derived on those smaller universities who do research which is not in line with the current trends, and all of their money gets stolen and puts into this research. So that's where the actual delta lies. Secondly, on responding, if small researchers on their side of small companies who also are in AI technology want to do research, big companies have incentives to acquire them because they want competition in the market. Therefore, big startups or big companies and MNCs often end up hiring small companies and startups anyways. So they would anyways get access to equipments of big companies, etc., on either side of the house, which is why on OG's benefit, I would posit is largely uncomparative, whereas on our side, there's a certain harm onto individuals who are incredibly vulnerable to these harms. Why is this more important than opening opposition? Because no, opening opposition's harms are speculative at best, that there might be some logistical issues which might delay the research or the quality of the research a little bit. A, they never prove the extent to which this happens. Secondly, they never prove the certainty of this. Third, they never explain the actual people who are harmed by this. We ground our impact onto people who are extremely vulnerable and who are impacted, and our impacts and harms are more certain.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call Government Whip.
Okay, I'd like POIs to be verbal. I'll call on you, but I just won't be reading the chat. So that's that. Starting the speech then. 3, 2, 1. Firstly, dealing with CG hopefully rather quickly in 2 quick ways. They first talk about how you would otherwise raise money for things like liberal arts, etc., other forms of degrees. I think this largely misses the debate. You see, liberal arts, humanities, etc., tend to not use equipment the extent to which STEM fields do. If they do use equipment, it's not highly expensive equipment. The motion clearly frames this out. But secondly, they talk about most vulnerable actors, and I just think this also is largely not within the scope of this debate. The reason for this is because because irrespective of the ways in which people get into this research, whether they're within a prestigious university or not, whether they're using that state access, it tends to not be super vulnerable people who become researchers in the first place because there are certain reasons that university in many different ways selects for more privileged people. I don't think that's the scope of this debate. I think we should refocus and talk about the ways in which NAV demonstrates that research and education become better, weighing that then against opening government and what they give you. Opening government have a myriad of mechanisms, but I think NAV's like one primary mechanism is more comparative and stronger for a number of different reasons what they give you. Briefly going over what OGs say, they say, 1, people are locked out of going to universities and accessing their research. 2, states can liaise and control their objectives better. 3, encourage more private objectives, private investment. And 4, you can conglomerate and add together multiple technologies together. Look, these things sound good, and they are good, but they're all less comparative than what NAV tells you when he gets to the heart of the problem of competition between universities when their incentive structure is such that there's a lot of waste which happens. First thing is on uniqueness. Directly comparing this to the thing about people being locked out of accessing universities, like maybe an individual cannot go to Cambridge who would have otherwise wanted to do genetics research there, but the problem is you can just set a motion which allows more people to go to Cambridge, and then you wouldn't need to do this pooling thing in the first place. But secondly, on universality for all the other mechanisms OG provide you, in terms of state liaising and private investment and adding together technologies, these are things which OO correctly point out are things which could be done on a state-by-state basis. You don't need a universal policy to nationalize all research on high tech in order to do this. Why is this important? Because the thing which requires you to nationalize all of this research and create a pool is to undermine the incentive structure in the first place which universities have. So you have waste removed, because even if you have even if you buy up 50% of the high-tech stuff, then you still have the underlying funding mechanism and the underlying competition mechanism that Oxford and Cambridge will then be competing against each other for, which you then have a tremendous amount of waste continuing to happen in the long run that wouldn't have otherwise happened, which is why this motion is essential. I think there are a couple of other ways which this mech is just more specific to high-tech equipment that allows us to scale our impact. That means the sunk cost problem has a bigger effect the more expensive the equipment is, but this lasts longer into the future, and this integrates in Abhinav's extension on education improvement as well. That is that NAV's analysis is incentive-based. It's not fiat-based, it's not policy-based, and it's not based on whims or trends. That means that OG's funding can peter out someday. Maybe the waste of techs goes up and goes down. There's an ebb and flow. Maybe private investment is higher and lower at different times. Maybe states are more and less efficient at like centralizing and agglomerating technologies over time. But the thing which changes in a certain way in the long run is that research becomes less wasteful between universities, and secondarily, the education incentive structure of universities, that meaning that they focus less on marketing themselves as a university with a lot of equipment, but instead have an upward trajectory of marketing themselves as a university which can educate people well. That's the thing which certainly goes up, because that's now within their incentive, because obviously the competition incentive within universities still exists. They just can't do it in this way. Responding to opening opposition on their principal claim first, where they say you would otherwise obtain in a legitimate way, universities are entitled to their private property. Note that absent a sufficient opening government response, beating this principle would be opening government as well. There's two justifications why this expropriation of this technology on a universal scale is justified then. The first is that it serves the public good. This is the same as when you nationalize something like healthcare, because you can improve people's lives as a result of that. As a result of this in the long run. Claudia's response to this is that it's speculative as to whether this will improve the public good or not, and therefore it's unjustified. But I think this is a red herring. I think it's red herring to say that whether something's speculative or not actually unjustifies whether it's okay to do. Two ideas here. The first is that it's also speculative when conscripting a population to national service, whether that this will save the country or not, because you might lose that war, but you still want to serve the public good by doing conscription. So you will have a denial of agency because you want to improve that country, even if there's just a chance of of doing that. But secondly, in terms of waste and more specific and analogous, it's speculative as to whether the government buying roads and trains, even if the train companies did not consent to this, it's speculative whether this will actually improve transport or not. But if there is a cost benefit analysis that you can prove an incentive structure where waste will be reduced, then this is justified, and that's what Nav accomplishes in a speech. But the other justification is why it refocuses universities to act in better ways, which are more educational. Yeah, I'll take you.
Your case, it's state interference in process of creating the public good. On our side of the house, this is a preparation. This is something which you invent, and the output it's not clear yet. On our side of the house, you have higher probability because less actors are involved in order to meddle with this, and less actors taking the bit of the benefits to give.
I just don't think there's a meaningful difference when you say this compared to state interference in the process of doctors saving patients, right? This is like, I don't see the meaningful difference here. But the other principal justification is when you refocus universities to focus on education more. Why? Because you better fulfill the obligation of an educational institution. And insofar as two groups of people are being undermined on either side, that is, on Gov, we're undermining some privileged people's rights to extend their wealth even more by having more private property. On Op, they're undermining the ability for people to attain a good education because universities are not prioritizing their interests. If you have to undermine the rights of one group of people, I'd rather it's the first. But extraneous responses to finish off OO. They say there's less incentive from private sector because they feel like they're just going to have their money taken away from them. I think this is probably done in a reasonably sensible way where the state, assuming feasibility, probably has enough money going towards these things that this can be done in a way that doesn't perturb investment. The final thing they say is that there's waste because you have to move the technology a lot. I think moving technology from Cambridge to London is just not as much of waste as the amount of waste which Nav details in this speech. Vote CG.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue sum up the entire debate, very proud to call opposition with. Ooh.
Hi, I'm audible. Just setting up a timer. Starting in 3, 2, 1. First, I just want to prove why liberal arts is part of this debate, and don't let CG run away by saying that, oh, they don't use high-tech instruments. First, they need to do things like understand what the brain chemistry is. Like, there are literally researchers on how blacks think and whites think, and to prove that they probably are not that different as to what propaganda is. Therefore, you need things like MCR scanners. You need things like GIS software, which are way, way expensive for universities to have, and therefore probably are come under things like high tech. You need high visual scanners to know what fossil fuels are there, or what like Egyptian pharaohs are there that you are doing in your excavation processes. So it is unlikely that liberal arts don't use high tech researchers or high-tech equipments at the very first place. I think there are millions of other examples as to how in archaeology, how in psychology, these equipments are used. By then, liberal arts is something that is important and is going to win this debate. First, this is the only way through which research is diversified, and diversification in research is something that is the most important. OG frames how trends change, and often researchers become irrelevant at their PM. So if chatbots like ChatGPT are relevant right now, like they might not be 10 years after according to their own analysis. Hence, the research at OG often becomes way concentrated on ChatGPT and etc. And the harm is detrimental when trends change because this research was never diversified. Because their own analysis says that you put all the money into things like which have greater societal implications and are trending right now. The problem is that in status quo, most countries do not have technology to find what the future is going to be, because markets are dynamic. They're prone to things like economic shocks, prone to things like war, prone to things like COVID. So it is always speculative whether the researchers will be relevant or not. At a point of time, you do not have any fallback mechanisms or any other research is done in your own nation. Therefore, this diversification in research is absent, and you fall into the trap when all these researches become irrelevant. On our side, when universities independently can research and do things which are more proximate to their own ideologies and incentives, that is, say, a liberal university probably would not work on AI or ChatGPT. There is more diversification in types of research you do. So even if ton of research becomes irrelevant on our side also, you at least have fallback mechanisms on our side. So at least some research is something that has happened on our side. But third, no, development in things like AI, which have large social implications, happens anyways on both sides, because companies have various divisions to work on it. They want to get first movers advantage, they want to get legacy, etc., and they still want to develop on it because that is the most profitable in status quo. OG never proves why this is the tipping point to work on things like ChatGPT and which things are irrelevant in status quo. But second, note, researches on all benches will always remain speculative, because you cannot ever confirm if any research would be successful or not, because it is dependent on tons of variables like knowledge limitations, unknown errors, scientists fucking up because he didn't have his coffee on that day. Researchers are probably very precise, and any error causes them to not go ahead and accrue in good forms, or are likely to fail at any point of time. Hence, all benches at their best, even if prove that more researches happen, always give you a speculative benefit. The only certain thing in this debate is then liberal art universities getting equipments to research, and researchers and students who are in these universities not forced to lose their aspirations and not forced to lose their jobs and livelihoods because they never get their own equipment that has been taken away by states. Why then, on our side, at least these liberal art universities and researchers and students can keep their livelihood? Things like endowment funds still exist on our side. So billionaires funding liberal art universities for their own PR image, getting taxes on tuition fees, etc., getting funding from alumni, etc., but also getting fundings from states and opposition parties and Western countries and Western media, etc., can still exist on our side. Therefore, this funding at least gives you some autonomy over the research you want to do, and that does not take the equipment away from you towards these big states, which probably never give you this back. Why then everything that OG says that, oh, states have these incentives to be good, is outdone by political incentives? First, the very reason for these states existing is when they get votes and are able to establish their propaganda. Power is something that is most proximate to them. Even if they get called out, I think they want to be in power for longer amount of time, hence actively want to push down researches that hurt them and hurt their ideologies. So probably if Donald Trump doesn't believe in climate change, he does not want to fund researches which prove that climate change is happening, because it goes against his own manifestos and his own ideas, and creates more call out against him. At a point of time, power is something that is the very existence of Donald Trump existing as president in the very first place. It outdoes all other incentives of academics and think tanks calling out against him. But second, you often still don't want to give tech to small universities anyway, even if they have good ideas taking OG at their best. Note, this high-tech equipment is limited because they are expensive, etc., according to all the benches in their side of the house. Therefore, you probably do not have a lot of high-tech equipment anyways. Therefore, you need to prioritize some people over other people when you want to distribute this. First, researchers from smaller universities don't have enough lobby power in comparison to big researchers from big universities, because they have more money, more say in academic circles, and therefore they are ones who are prioritized. But second, top universities often poach big researchers from small universities, or even researchers who have good ideas, because they want first mover advantage and can give them things like tenure and high salaries. So often small universities are fucked anyways. But third, even if they have good ideas, there is no precedence of small universities being successful in big scale researches. So there is less trust in them in academic circles. And if states go ahead and give them this high-tech equipment, there is going to be call out in academic circles anyways. Therefore, at a point of time, states can also escape call out, but can also fulfill their power incentives. I don't think they give funding to small universities anyway on their side. Therefore, the delta at OG and CG is that you still give equipment back to those big research universities, but just you take now more time and more bureaucratic process. I don't think that's a net good. The third thing I want to do is just get CG out of this debate. Their whole case is contingent upon that, oh, universities don't know each other and what they're working on. First, often universities have to put out things like audit and use of money in terms of how funding happened, because you have pressure from alumni, pressure from parents who are giving fees, and states, you need to show IRS forms to states to show where your money was spent. So you probably show states that we are working on this equipment, and probably that is more public, and therefore other universities can know. But second, discussions in academic circles still happen. Share what you're working on. Professors share what they're working on. Before that, PIOG.
OP never responds to the structural reasons we give why the bureaucracy will not be severe due to the body's incentive and capacity to be well financed. But anyways, that harm is clearly outweighed by the benefits of preventing duplicates, as CG repeats, ensuring tech gets to the most efficient.
Why duplicates do not happen on our side of the house, and why you can do it faster. First, often already proved why universities have to put out audits and other universities can know on what equipment they're working. But second, discussions in academic circles and professors talk about how they're working, what they're working on, because they have a reputation to maintain. But third, even if you bring 3 extra equipments at CG or OG, which are redundant, just sell it to other countries. You can still form profit from it. Sell it to international universities. I don't think they're completely redundant in that. But lastly, they prove that, universities don't share things and have incentives to maintain first mover advantage. First, they have mutual benefits, right? So they probably are researching on different things and want first mover advantage to each other. And therefore, they have impetus to share this technology with each other. So both of them can have first mover advantages in their own field. But second, the very incentive to not create irrelevant tech pushes them to share, right? It is the flip to like literally what OG and CG says. But third, they often collaborate on same researches. Different professors from various universities collaborate. Literally, Nobel Prize winners have different professors from different universities working on the same thing, because the incentive to complete the research will always be more important for universities over things like their own reputation, etc. because of that view.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech and everyone for the debate. Great job. Please, sir, thank you. Leave the room. We'll deliberate. We'll call you back once we're ready.